Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Leadmore podcast. I'm your host, John T. Meyer. The Leadmore podcast is the show where we sit down and talk to leaders of today to help inspire and create more leaders for tomorrow. Because I believe the world needs more leaders, and you should be the next one. In this episode, we sit down with Jennifer Ford Reedy, who is the president of the Bush Foundation. Jennifer described herself as a do-gooder ever since she was a little girl. We talked about the opportunity/challenge of mixing philanthropy with business, with government, and how when we can cross-sector, we can really get some amazing things done. Jennifer unpacks the story and the history of the Bush Foundation, an incredible organization that's been creating change in the upper Midwest for decades. What does it mean to be a Bush Fellow? This is an amazing program where they give you $100,000 to chase your dreams, to become better, to become a great leader. Jennifer knows leaders, and we talk about that. And lastly, you need to hear the story of when a mentor asked Jennifer, "What's your dream job?" You need to hear her answer because I loved it. So enjoy this conversation as I sit down and talk to my friend, Jennifer Ford Reedy. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Leadmore podcast. I'm really excited for today's conversation with Jen Ford Reedy, the president of the Bush Foundation. How are you?
I am very good. It's nice to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I know you're a busy person, so I'm excited for today's conversation. I want to hear from you when you meet somebody at a cocktail party, which we of course don't go to anymore. How do you tell people what you do when you describe your job?
The simplest way to describe it is that we give away money. It's an extraordinary kind of institution where Archie Bush left his money to the community. Back in the 50s, he created the Bush Foundation, and years later, there's still this group of us that is charged with doing the most possible good we can with the resources that he left to the community. I think there's a lot you can say about foundations, good and bad, and what it means for somebody to make so much money to be able to create a foundation. And there are plenty of very, very, very fair and true critiques of foundations. And there are also things that I find extraordinary about a foundation, including the fact that he created something with enough and had enough trust that people decades later would be able to serve that institution in the spirit that he intended and to continue to try to do good in his memory and in his name, which to me is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. I was going to ask you, is there data on how long trust typically exists, like a lifeline or lifetime, and do they stick to the mission? I think that's one thing I feel like Bush is only growing your impact from this gift that was 70 years old.
It's a controversial question in our field, actually, whether foundations should be perpetual or whether foundations should be terminal. And a lot of the big foundations that people know, like Ford Foundation or MacArthur Foundation or Rockefeller, those are perpetual foundations. So the intent of them is to be around forever. I would say that some of the highest impact foundations in the history of our country have been terminal foundations, but you don't know their names in the same way because they haven't stuck around. Sure. But there's something about saying, okay, we've got this amount of money and 20 years, go. That actually I think can make foundations more aggressive, more ambitious, and sometimes higher impact. They just don't stay in people's minds, and because they literally aren't around in the same way, and we don't always appreciate the impact that some of those foundations have had.
Interesting. So that forcing function of you have a time limit to make your biggest impact makes you maybe think differently?
Yeah, and I a lot of the foundations that I admire most were terminal foundations because I do think that it changes the mindset and how you do your work. Part of the critique within the field is actually a political one. So some of our organizations within the field that are more politically conservative really, really advocate for people to create time-limited foundations because the people who make the money within foundations tend to actually be more politically conservative. But then over time, the people who work at foundations tend to be more politically liberal. So you have a lot of foundations where the work that is being done today is super different in spirit and in sort of intent in some ways than that founder. So that question of donor intent, how much do you need to live up with what the founder meant it to be, is a real question. And for there's some folks who really advise people, like, make it terminal. Don't let it keep going on and on and on and potentially drift further and further away from what you intended. It's an interesting question to me.
Do you feel like would that be applicable to the Bush Foundation in terms of thinking about original intent, or how do you think about that?
I don't think so. I really feel like, we don't do Ouija board philanthropy. We're not trying to guess all the time what Archie Bush would want to do, but I feel very proud that a lot of what we do is spiritually aligned with the way Archie Bush thought about philanthropy. I don't know what his political opinions would be on every question of the day,
Sure.
But he really believed in investing in people. He really believed in thinking creatively about ways that philanthropy could make change. But from the beginning, the Bush Foundation was doing things that were really innovative, I think, in our field. And I feel really good about the fact that even though the Bush Foundation, I hope, is relevant for today, that there's a through line between what we do and the kind of change that Archie Bush worked to make in his lifetime and wanted to make with the foundation.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that you have this boss that you can't really talk to, right? He's not around anymore, but so you're trying to do what he would want, but also do what people need, I suppose.
And we have a lot of latitude. He did not give very much instruction, so we have an extraordinary amount of latitude. So honestly, I don't have to care very much what Archie Bush would have done.
Sure.
I think the legacy and life of Archie Bush actually gives us a lot to work with that makes us stronger as a foundation by tying ourselves back to,
Cool.
What he wanted us to be, and that we can be a lot of that and actually have great impact in the community.
Yeah. Do good, invest in people. There's a lot, but you can take that a lot of ways.
Yeah. He was a guy who, he was one of the guys who built 3M into a big, successful corporation. And he would, pay for employees to go to medical school, or, he would he was a sales guy. I think he considered himself a good judge of people. Yeah. And when he'd see people who he thought had potential, or when he ran across people he thought had really great need, he would give generously of his own resources to support them.
That's great.
And that's unusual. So Bush is very unusual among significant foundations in giving money directly to people, which we do through our Bush Fellows program. That's not usual for very good reason. The IRS doesn't really encourage foundations to give to people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity for self-dealing, fraud, inappropriate things there. We actually have an agreement we've worked out with the IRS that we're still operating under that allows us to do the Bush Fellows program within a certain set of constraints.
Yeah.
But it's unusual in foundations that we actually give, up to $100,000 to 24 people every year. It's not common.
Yeah. So I was going to start with some of your origin, but let's stay here because I think it's really relevant. So you have the fellow program. You also have community grants or gifts. So just kind of unpack the different ways that Bush supports both people and communities.
Yeah. So our tagline, I would say, is also our strategy, which is we invest in great ideas and the people who power them. So we do that in a variety of ways, but that really is the heart of what we do. I would break it down into two categories of things that we do that are very interrelated. The one is develop, test, and spread great ideas. So to support community-driven innovation on social challenges. And then the other is inspire, equip, and connect people to make the region better for everyone. And those are very connected because if you're going to develop, test, and spread great ideas, that's going to be about, people doing the work to get there. So those two concepts are related, but we want to make sure we're making a difference on both parts of that aspiration for our work.
Yeah. And I guess to clarify for folks who maybe don't know, the region is defined for you guys as Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota.
And the 23 Native nations that share that geography. Yeah.
Yep. And was that simply because that was sort of the 3M footprint, or why did Archie choose that?
No, it's a little random. So when Archie died, the board at the time thought that it was too much money to just focus on St. Paul. So they thought Bush should be a regional foundation. And the only definition of region they could really find was the Fed district. So that is also included Montana, but we found pretty quickly, we were doing site visits for every grant at that time and just felt like, okay, it was too hard to cover Montana well. And then eventually decided it was too hard to explain why we only cared about half of the people in Wisconsin. So we let Wisconsin go too. And then for a long time, we've just been Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and those 23 Native nations. And it's a little bit of a historical accident, but it's been true for us for a long time. And I think it's one of the things that actually defines us. So it's something that at this point is pretty core, I think, to how we think of the Bush Foundation.
That's great. And so communities or folks can apply for the fellowship. Folks who maybe lead organizations or groups can apply for the grant. There's a few different ways that, and maybe unpack like which one is, if someone's listening to this and wants to get involved, what's the right fit? How do you know which path to go toward?
Well, the Bush Fellowship is actually about investing in you as an individual leader. So it's not about some project that you want to do in your community. It's actually saying, I see a vision for the impact that I can have as an individual. And I see that I need to develop some skills or build connections or have another set of experiences or credentials to be able to be that kind of leader that I'm imagining. And that's really what the Bush Fellowship is for. It's an investment in you toward the larger future end of having an impact in the community, but the money has to be on, a sort of leadership development plan for yourself. Our grants are more about the work. So the grants are at the moment where you're like, okay, a bunch of organizations, we're coming together, we have an idea, we think we can work differently around substance abuse, or we have a breakthrough idea, and how would be thinking about rural grocery distribution. We just approved a grant on that just this week that I thought was really cool.
That's interesting, yeah.
And that's when we're available. So we're not, if you have an organization that's doing amazing work in whatever field, we may be a resource for you at some time, but it's that moment in your work where you are trying to really think differently about how you're solving a problem or how you're working with other leaders. So we're not useful all the time to leaders, but we hope that at various moments in different organizations' work, we can be there for them when they're taking on that sort of phase of their mission.
Great. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show today. I mean, both you came up several times for people as a great leader in our region, but also that idea of empowering leaders. So a mutual friend of ours who has also been on the show, David Whitesock, did the fellowship. And he talked about that, getting these experiences, kind of breaking these kind of barriers into new opportunities that allows him to, his impact as a Bush Fellow, he's still writing that story, down the road. So how do you guys think about leadership when you find these folks? Because many of these folks are high achievers doing great things already. Yeah. So when you think, what's a leader look like that Bush wants to invest in?
Well, there are all kinds of fantastic leaders in the region who wouldn't be fits for Bush Fellowship, because Bush Fellowship is a particular kind of program that may or may not be useful to different people. So we definitely have a definition of leadership that's more expansive than the fellowship, because the fellowship really is a tool for leaders. It's an experience and sort of an opportunity to develop your own leadership. And we think, try to think very expansively about what it means to be a leader in your context and toward whatever end you're trying to work in your community. But the trick about the Bush Fellowship is really, to me, how would you make use of that money in a way that you can make the case that will actually allow you to be a stronger leader. So we have people who are incredibly accomplished who win Bush Fellowships, but they've had to make a case, a very humble case, that they see there's all the ways growth that they could be better, right? So it isn't a prize. It isn't like, you're a great leader, you get the prize. I mean, you have to come in with a sense of like, I've done enough that you can see, that I have the energy, the passion, the skills. But I know I need to get better, and this is how I could use the resources to get there. So we, we choose 24 fellows a year. The last few years, it's been kind of 600, 700 applicants, so that's,
Wow.
and we can go through that list each year and see people who are turned down that are incredible leaders. Like if it was a prize, they would get it.
Sure.
But it's really about, can you make a case that at this moment in your trajectory, getting this opportunity could really change things for you and actually change that trajectory in a way that would allow you to be a more transformative leader for the region.
That's fantastic. Do you guys think, because then if for those 24 who get it, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of on your own, right? Like
It's
you guys
on your
don't
own.
develop leadership programming. They choose the route to go pursue.
It's not the starter course. I mean, it's kind of like you've done the leadership things that you can. Like, what are those programs out there where you've taken advantage of those things where there's structured leadership programs and things, and now saying, like, for me to go to the next level, I've got to design my own path. So it's just not easy. I can't emphasize that enough. Like it's finding 24 each year that have a real plan for how to use that money is the trick. It's not about the number of leaders we have, because we are, oh man, so fortunate. I mean, in my job, I get to see leadership all around all the time, and I'm so impressed with people and the ways they're making change. But to be able to do that and say, okay, I'm going to be able to take 2 years, which just that is hard for people.
Yeah, right.
I can carve out the space to really do this, and then I know what I need, and I can make the most of this opportunity.
So probably relevant to that point and very relevant to the show. And I know I'm sure there's a huge process, a committee. It's not like you're sitting there and picking the leaders, but what do you look for? What do you think makes a great leader? The characteristics, is it skill set, mindset? What do you think when you identify some of these folks?
There are all kinds of ways to be effective leaders. There are leadership styles that I like more than others and respect more than others, but there are lots of ways to be a leader, because I think leadership is defined ultimately by the effect you have on other people, right? So it's, are you actually in what you do, what you say, how you are you actually impacting what other people believe and do, right, in some ways, right? So I think sometimes you get into this idea that leadership is about a position or leadership is a function. And you're sort of like, yeah, those may be, because of your role, you may be making decisions that affect people, but leadership as a verb is more about, to me, good leadership is, can you help people see possibilities for themselves, for groups that are bigger or different than what they can see, and then inspire and support them to get there. To me, that's the definition of great leadership.
I love that. Gave me goosebumps. That was good.
Yeah.
And then how do you decipher? That's a great question. And then how do you guys answer that question through an interview and an application? That's hard.
It's hard. And we work so hard to be in context too, because, I get to read usually at the stage where we're down to 60 and we're choosing 36 to interview.
Sure.
And so you're reading these applications, which are amazing. People put so much heart in them. I mean, they're really like laying out their dreams, and they're incredible to read.
Yeah.
But each time it's like, okay, I have to get in this person's mind and in their context to try and understand this application. I learned pretty quickly that my definitions of leadership, my experience of leadership, just don't translate to every community in every way. So you'd have, a person who maybe their dream was to be able to be an adjunct professor at a community college. And, I would think, well, that doesn't, in my context, that doesn't sound like a very influential position within the scheme of the Twin Cities. I think surely there are people who are in those positions and are having influence, but that's not a natural path that I would necessarily think to aspire to. And then you think, okay, given the kind of change this person wants to make, and they're in a rural community, a fairly rural community in South Dakota, what's a job where they could actually get paid to do the
Change.
thing that they want to do and make the
Yeah.
change. And you're like, perfect. Like that is exactly right. Like that should be the aspiration to get to that role, to be able to have the impact that they're wanting to have. But it's tiring in some ways to read them because you have to so completely give yourself over to
Yeah.
understanding this person's vision of their path and what that means in their context.
Yeah. Almost. It's got to be hard to pull out that your own individual bias, right, on what leadership is or your own
Right.
background. Yeah.
And that's true in all grant making, but it's particularly true for the fellowship because it is so personal.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like you're telling someone your idea or your path is better. Like it's not actually that way, but it feels that way probably
right,
to them.
right,
Yeah.
right.
One more, and then I want to talk about your leadership journey. How do you think of, because David and I have talked about this, and maybe this could be Bush's stance or your stance, but how philanthropy and business can lead together to create more impact and change, right? Because you have leaders sort of from both cloths. I'd say maybe more on the philanthropy side or the nonprofit side, but what's the intersection of that look like in your eyes?
I am super interested in that intersection. I'm interested in cross-sector leadership in general. In fact, our purpose statement at the Bush Foundation is inspiring and supporting creative problem solving within and across sectors to make the region better for everyone. This is actually for my undergraduate kind of thesis passionate writing, it was all about this sort of cross-sector work. And that's actually part of what drew me into philanthropy, is the idea that within philanthropy you could work across sectors, because I just think when you think about our most challenging problems, like government cannot solve them alone, business cannot solve them alone, nonprofits cannot solve them alone. So I think to really make progress on the challenges that are the most complicated and difficult for us to solve, we've got to think about how do we bring out the best of all different kinds of organizations and use the power that business has as an employer, as a provider of services, as an economic development engine for a place, like all the ways that businesses can make, like how do we bring that contribution in alongside, the social service supports from the nonprofits or the policy or government programs, or, and so I think the more we can think across those boundaries, I think the better. I also think that in a lot of ways, the boundaries are false. I mean, I think of
Blurring.
every organization to some extent as an impact organization, right? Every organization that is having an impact on their community, on the world.
Sure.
Now, how intentional that is may be different in different organizations, but each of us, every one of us, is doing some things that are good, that are sort of contributing to the community, and some things that are not so good, right?
Yeah.
So that's Bush Foundation too, like everybody. And so I think if we can have every organization thinking, okay, if I want to improve my net impact as an organization, how do I cause a little less harm? How can I do a little more good, but have not think that, the nonprofits are the do-gooders and businesses are out for themselves, but think, no, every one of us is in this. And how do we think about what we can bring and what incremental difference we can make towards making the world better?
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, I think that change is happening slowly, that businesses realize the impact they can make, and not just in profit and, shareholder value, but kind of that triple net phrase of making impact, or like a B Corp, that type of thing.
Yeah, totally. So, and just what it means to be a good employer, to provide good jobs, just that simple part. I mean, I think, you can give grants to organizations that their whole purpose is doing good, and they don't pay living wages to their workers,
Sure.
And then how do you compare the impact of that organization with a business that maybe, is mostly selling things that people don't need, but is providing really terrific jobs and benefits for people that are allowing them to have a stable life and all that means for their kids, or, the it's impact, not simple. It's not simple. It's not, these organizations are good, these are not good. I think we all have roles to play.
So I guess I lied. I have one more before we talk about you.
I'm great to talk about anything other than these, so we can just keep going on this track.
This show started in June, and so it hasn't. Almost every episode we've had to talk about 2020 and what that's impact across all these different sectors and different leaders. So whether it be the social justice movement, which you guys are right in the epicenter of, or COVID and the pandemic, has Bush had to alter its compass or change anything in 2020 world?
Yes, a lot, both in terms of our internal plans, what we had planned over the year that didn't go, but then also, what kind of impact we want to have on our communities as they're wrestling with such profound and unprecedented challenges. So we've changed a lot. I mean, we in our own operations, we went remote, and so that's a jolt in and of itself. But we have redirected lots of money and rethought really everything we do. We made a lot of different program shifts this year, but we're continuing to make more next year. And both the immediate response to COVID and then the recession, but also the reckoning around racial justice and what each of us as individuals, as organizations, are being called to re-examine about ourselves and ways to make new commitments or deepen existing commitments to making a difference. We're taking all of that to heart. Our board is, our staff is, and we're making a lot of changes.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's hard. Like foundations, especially as we started off the top, have a lot of history and have a lot of probably this is the way we've always done it. So like you're probably making some tough examinations.
It is hard. We've done, like the right away in 2020, we just said, okay, we won't do the Bush Prize this year, which is one of our grant programs, thinking let's get that money out to immediate needs. But now we kind of are going that next level down. So we just, announced that we're not doing our event sponsorship program anymore in the same way. And, they're hard because we weren't doing anything that we didn't think was good. We wouldn't have been doing it if we didn't think it was good. And they're all, everything that we're doing, we have staff who really highly value it and people in the community that really, really highly value it. So really saying, okay, is this the most important thing we can be doing right now? Which is a really hard question, and a question we're really asking ourselves on every bit of our work, and does lead you to some changes. There are people who will be really disappointed with every decision we've made. And I have to say, I've been wowed by how supportive responses have been to the changes that we make. I mean, I do think that right now needs are so intense that people are really understanding and not viewing it as a foundation just entertaining itself by changing its focus areas all the time, which really frustrates people.
Yeah.
We've experienced in people's responses a lot of understanding and appreciation that we're making hard decisions at a time when we all should be making hard decisions about whether we are having the most impact that we can.
Yeah, that's a great, I mean, I'm sure you've always looked at it as like, what's the greatest amount of impact? But then there's this lens of for today, like right now in this world that we have to like fix. So, and in
general, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
In general, foundations can be long-term thinkers, and that's part of our value in the world is that we can actually think toward long-term change.
Yeah, you're not have a quarterly earnings report. You just,
that's right. So in general, we try not to be super responsive, to headlines or to things that change because, individual donors, other people can sort of move right toward the headlines. And we try and think about, okay, what's that longer term change strategy? I mean, investing in leadership, for example, we don't know what the outcome of that is going to be, and we don't know when it's going to happen. Like that's thinking long term as a change strategy.
Good point.
But when the situation is so extraordinary, like it is right now, one, you just have to acknowledge that people are not in the space to be doing that kind of long-term, some of that problem solving that we respond in the same way. Yep. But then also, I think when you think about what possible impact you can have, if you can save a job, if you can keep somebody in a house, like there are a lot of ways right now where the biggest opportunity for impact is actually preventing loss and hardship for people that will then be so much harder as a community to try and come back from. So I do think that, if you're trying to, as a philanthropist, as an individual philanthropist, as an institution, trying to think, okay, what's the best impact for my charitable dollar? That the answer to that question changes in extraordinary times.
Yeah. Instead of the, prevention, it's more of like the immediacy I don't know how to think about that, but yeah, you're right. Well, as a compliment, I know on episode 4, we had another mutual friend, Tanisa Islam,
Yeah,
who was a Bush fellow and talked
yeah.
about her program that she started here in Sioux Falls with families impacted from Smithfield. And she mentioned how Bush reacted and supported so quickly. So props to you
I
guys.
I really admire Denise and the work that she's doing. That's a case where um, it's our hope that when we are helping to respond or supporting efforts that are immediate response efforts, we're also investing in something that's going to be a long-term impact. And our hope is that that amazing sort of organizing collaborative work that she is helping to lead is going to result in sort of sustainable
Yeah.
um, changes in terms of operating relationships and partners and how people are thinking about um, their power in community, but also sort of their relationships and what can be done working that way. So so I think that's the like how can you invest in the short term in the immediate, but always try and keep that long term. Will something longer term be better from this too? And I think there
Yeah.
are those opportunities out there.
Yeah, get that win-win
Yeah,
if you can tackle both.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's unpack your leadership journey a little bit. We won't.
Okay.
You've done great, but I know you are a Jayhawk, so you grew up
Yes.
and went to Kansas, right?
Yep.
And then you went on to the corporate world in McKinsey. But you did touch earlier. You said that you wrote was it a graduate thesis about this idea of sort of the different cross sectors and industries of impact. So did you start to get an interest in philanthropy at that age, or how did you end up?
I was actually talking about undergrad being into cross sector, but I actually did write my graduate school thesis on social purpose business is what I wrote it on. The sort of
Okay.
the idea of doing business, of creating businesses that were intentionally designed to solve social problems. So that actually is true too.
Okay. Accidentally
But
true.
I think I from the outset, I'm not sure why, but I always was driven wanting to be a do-gooder of some kind from when I was small. Um, and I think
And where did that
as
come from,
my
you think? Was that your
what
parents, or where do you think that came from?
I don't know. I I think some is those things that are just in us. And we don't know why where we get energy. I think some of it is realizing really early that I got affirmation when I did those things, and so you start to become more of what
Sure.
you get positive feedback for. I was a third kid, and I think my parents would say like I I was creating space for themselves within a family, and I think even within our family, I was like let me help you with those groceries, mom, kind of. It's like that's my space is that I can be the
Yep.
a
Yep.
really good, helpful kid. Um, and my understanding of what it meant to be a do-gooder in the world changed over time. But
Sure.
when I was in kindergarten, my mom took me out of school when former President Ford came to town
Wow.
to go hear him speak. Like it was clear even then, and not my sisters. Like it was clear that that was my interest. I was interested in politics. I was interested in leadership.
Interesting.
Um, and so, at first I thought to really make a difference, you should be president. And then I thought to really make a difference, maybe you should be senator. And then I thought to really make a difference, maybe you should be doing local politics or, like it changed over time. And then I had a
Yep.
phase of maybe it's through nonprofits or maybe, so I feel like in the course of my, first 20-ish years of life, tried to think about a variety of different ways to make an impact. And I had a dad have a dad who is a business professor
Okay.
who would always say, if you want to make a difference, you should make a lot of money and give it away. So those were the debates
Sure.
around
That's
the
both of those
kitchen
sectors
table
we
where I was like,
talked
no, I
about.
want to
Yeah.
join the Peace Corps. And he's like, no, you should make money. And then this is what you can do with it. And so I feel like that cross-sector interest grew out of all those different experiences and realizing, oh, all these things that I've explored in my head as like, maybe this is the way to have impact, maybe this is the way to have impact, feeling like, oh, all of these are ways to have impact and that you can actually have more powerful impact if you figure out how to mix them
Yeah.
and combine the powers and the flexibilities that each sector has in different ways. And then that's what made me think, oh, in philanthropy, you actually are not exactly in the sectors in the same way, and you can actually have kind of a platform to think about creative problem solving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that crossover continued because when you were at McKinsey, which would be very much, business
Yep.
strategy,
Yep.
consulting, you still blurred into working on the Itasca project, which
Yeah.
is a philanthropic project in the Twin Cities.
Business led,
Yeah.
but cross sector. And I think that was amazing actually that I got to have that experience because it was so much like, what I had sort of intellectually thought about and been interested in come to life. So it was
Awesome.
really lucky for me to get to have that experience, and thinking about when business is willing to get engaged, um, how amazing that can be, how powerful that can be, and how to, in my role with that organization, figure out how to translate across sectors, because people are
Yes.
used to
Yeah.
making decisions in different ways. They're motivated by different things. And so sometimes you can say, let's just create a big table and have everybody come together, and then it will collapse under its weight. Like, it takes a more creative, sort of nimble, like, what do you guys think? We can bring you here. And, maybe it's different decision-making tables sometimes, but then you get them coordinated, because
Yeah.
just realizing that worldview and motivation, and how long you expect to sit in meetings and what you expect those materials to be, like, all of those things are really different in different kinds of industries, fields, sectors. And so figuring out how to bring everybody in
Yep.
was a really, I think, amazing learning experience for me.
I feel like that could be the answer to our question here at the end. But what we've learned from this show that a lot of leaders have a moment in time, a crossroads or a path where they weren't sure which way to go, and maybe somebody, a loved one or a mentor or a friend, or even just inspiration, sort of pushed or nudged them. So I know after you left McKinsey, you worked at the St. Paul and Minneapolis Foundations, and now eventually, of course, the Bush. Did you have a moment like that in your journey where you weren't sure and someone said, "Hey, Jen, go do this"?
I did, and I didn't even know I was unsure. I actually had somebody ask me unsolicited, which was amazing. But I think I had made all of my career and life decisions based on, like, this looks like an amazing thing. I want to go do this. Like, I was always interested in every job. I still am. Like, I have job envy
Sure.
of everybody I meet. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, that sounds great. And I could definitely have been somebody who just wandered like
Yeah.
that from a career perspective, because I get excited about a lot
You're
of different
curious. Yeah.
things. Yeah. And actually, when I was first leading a Tasca project, it was designed to be time limited. It was only supposed to be 3 years. And so the idea was it was going to sunset. And the folks involved decided to continue it, and it's continuing on today. But
Yeah.
in those early years, we thought it was going to end. And one of the CEOs, there were a number of CEOs in Itasca who were so kind and supportive to me. But this one CEO, Lynn Casey, one time we were meeting, and she said, I have an idea that when Itasca ends, some of us could just fund you to do the thing that you're doing, to do this kind of problem solving
Yeah.
work. And I said, well, that can't work. You can't just be like a random particle.
Yeah.
You have to be attached to something, right?
Sure.
So what it made me think, okay, if that's the thing that I'm actually good at doing, and that's the way I want to have impact, where could I do that? And that's what I came back to Lynn actually later and said, I've thought about it, and I know what I want to be. I want to be president of the Bush Foundation.
No way. You said that.
Yeah.
And what year is this?
Oh, 2006.
Oh, I love it. So 6 years
And
prior.
she said, that's very specific. And it's, a super amazing coincidence that it's actually worked out and I have this exact job. But even if it hadn't worked out, it gave me focus. Like, it gave me a sense of, like, oh, if that's the thing I'm working toward, then what decisions would I make that would prepare me for that
Yep.
job?
Who's the type of person that could have that
Yeah,
job, and how?
and the Bush Foundation job actually came open. I applied. I was 34.
Oh.
Had never run anything really. I applied and I made it down to be a finalist, which was amazing. But I had the experience of really thinking through, like, what would I do, and going through that process, and then didn't get it. And so then I think, okay, so what's between me and getting that job? So it made me make some intentional career choices right then that I wouldn't have made otherwise because I was happy.
Yeah,
But it made me think, oh, okay, if I keep doing this exact job that I'm doing, I'm not showing any other skills. I'm not developing any other experiences around like managing people or doing things that you would do in a normal organization because
sure.
Itasca was kind of a virtual. And so I left and went to the St. Paul, Minnesota foundations and got a lot of organizational leadership experience that I didn't have. And then 4 years later, the job came open and I got it, which
That's
is,
so cool.
but the truth is, actually, at the time when I was interviewing for the job, I actually had a job offer at another foundation that's very similar. So even if the Bush hadn't worked
You had done
out,
the
I
playbook.
could
Yeah.
have done something that was similar. And actually, I sometimes counsel people, like when people come and want career advice and they say, I'm generally interested in something that's like this, and it's kind of the whole world. I would say, I think you're better off imagining a specific job, even if it's wrong. Like,
Sure.
imagine something specific and how would you get toward that. That's actually more helpful, and then people can help you think, well, that's kind of like this, or that's kind of like this, that's kind of like this, and you can
Yep.
go out from that. But if you generally say, I want to do all of this, it's hard to know, okay, are you getting closer or not?
Yeah, and I love how you did that because you started very specific, and whether that was the outcome, but you started to ask yourself, what are the things a person would need to do to be able to do that? And then you sort of filled the resume in and the experiences and to the
And I've
point where
encouraged
you
people
were
to do
ready.
that at other times, like people that I kind of coach or just friends or mentee kind of folks, and say, like, what's a job you want, and then try, because so many things are online. You can often like go back and find the job description from when the last search happened, and then say, let's look at that and say, what don't you have right now? If that's the dream,
Yeah.
and this is your current resume, like this is
Yeah.
your current experience, like what do you need? And it's really helpful then, I think, to think, oh, okay, like these are the skills I don't have, these are perspectives I need to work on, and it can help you give a developmental roadmap that, again, you can't really plan what jobs are going to come open and what search committees are going to do and hiring managers are going to do.
Sure.
But it can help you develop some kind of focus and intent for your own development.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. So one more, and then we're going to rapid fire with a few things
Okay.
to get to know you. What would you say to someone today, if whether they be an individual? I mean, I guess whoever's listening is an individual, but in their individual life as a personal philanthropist, maybe at their organization where they're going to nudge leadership or say, let's get involved, or even at a nonprofit, like across those, how can a person best support and do good, to your point about being a do-gooder, if you feel that way in 2020? What's the way that, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of different, depending on where you're at, but I
Yeah.
think there's this world now where even if I work within an employee at Lemonly wants Lemonly to do good, how can they
Yeah.
create impact?
So that can be a lot of different things, but I will say that the most important thing is that you actually tell somebody that.
Sure.
I think there are people in lots of organizations who wish their organization would do something different, and maybe they talk to their friends about it or complain at home about it, but they don't actually advocate for it
Yeah.
within the organization. And then the second thing is, in the way that you advocate it, tie it to what's the purpose of Lemonly.
Yeah.
So don't just say, I think we should X, if it's not related to the core of the conversation. I think you have to say, like, look, this is who we are. This is what we're trying to do in the world. If we just did this, I think we could add this and then see what it would do for us and our impact. I think it can't just be like random thoughts on the side, or you're just
Yep.
like unlikely to be effective.
Yep.
So I think you have to be willing to say it. And it's not just a casual mention that you think was a big deal because it took you you had to work yourself up to say it. And other people are like, no, and just go on. Like, you may have to say
Yeah.
it multiple times. You have to
Yeah.
say it very clearly, but then tie it to the strategy, mission, purpose, whatever the core of the work, to give it relevance. And it's not just, oh yeah, we could do that, but there are a whole lot of things we could do. How do you make it something that feels on strategy and enriching and improving to the
Yeah.
organization?
That's good. That's good. I mean, I just feel there are more people who have the desire and the want. And we talked about those cross sectors, from an individual check. That's a big deal, from, you and your partner, to going to your boss or leader and saying, let's get involved. Let's make an impact. And so I
think
think the
that's
desire
definitely
is
true
there,
in the
but you're right
workplace.
that there's the friction, like, how do I do it? And then a
How
lot
do I
of
do
folks
it?
maybe just give up.
I think that's right. And I think some of it may truly be they've tried and gotten shot down. But I think some part of it is actually nervousness about it. And then I'd say, well, try, see what
Sure.
see what happens. I think in everything we want to change in the world, um, we, all of us, I think, have a tendency to talk about that change with people who already believe it and commiserate with each other.
Sure.
And
Especially
then
at the
maybe
time
we
of year
feel
we're
like we're
at
doing
now.
something because we're talking about it a lot, but there's sort of a like, okay, who are you having a conversation with who doesn't already agree that that's the thing to do? And then how would you have that conversation in a way that makes them hear what you're saying? And I think that's true within the workplace, that's true in your neighborhood, that's true in your church, that's true wherever you are. But to say, are you having conversations with people who don't already agree with you? And how strategic, intentional can you be about the way in which you raise that issue or offer a question that allows for some new opening for discussion around that issue?
Yeah, which I think you just hit on. Like, first it's listening, then asking, and then talking, right?
Yeah.
Before you can create that change.
And that's so true. And to the origin of this question, the sort of organizational change. Like, if you don't show that you understand why things are the way they are and show respect for how things that are happening now, then I think people will be less receptive to your idea, that ability to say, I've done my homework. I understand why we do this policy this way. Could we have we ever thought about doing it this way, or have we ever, something that isn't just a sort of like, why in the world aren't you guys doing it this way, in a way that makes somebody feel sort of
doing it wrong.
Like, are you guys stupid or what? Like, I think it's sort of a how do you, in any change, I think if you're an organization, a leader coming into an organization, even if you're the one with all the power to change, you are way, way, way more likely to get people to buy in and be enthusiastic about a change if you can show how it builds on and improves and allows an organization to become more of what they want to be, rather than saying, okay, you guys all need to be different. Sometimes you can't do that authentically, but a lot of times you can. And I think the more you show respect for the effort and work that people are already doing, and then build from that, the more likely I think you are to get people excited about whatever that change is.
Yeah, because I'm sure in 2012 you had a lot of ideas of where you wanted Bush to go, but you also had a really successful, incredible organization that was already trucking and doing their own history. And how do you mesh those together?
How do you try and say, what are the things what I came in framing it as, like, really, how do we build on the best of Bush from all our history? Because we had gone through a strategic change that was kind of okay, we were this, now we're going to be something totally different, kind of strategic change. And I came in to be like, okay, how do we take the best of everything that we've tried, that history, and then go forward so that everything we're doing does have some root?
That's good. Well, thanks, Jen. I want to finish with a few questions just to kind of understand who you are as a person. I don't know if you're a reader, but what's a book that you often recommend, or a book you read recently that made an impact on you?
I am a big reader. I read lots and lots and lots. So these are hard. Picking a book questions are really hard ones for me.
Picking your favorite child.
I love biographies and sometimes memoirs, not always memoirs, because I'm not always confident in somebody else's ability to be their own narrator. But I think today I would recommend Sonia Sotomayor's a memoir, because I think it's amazing from a leadership perspective, because she actually does an amazing job of just sort of figuring out how to understand what she doesn't know and then learn it. Like, she has this amazing kind of self-improvement strategy for her life. But I'd also say it because when I read it, which it's been years now, but I learned a ton about Puerto Rico. And right at this moment where Puerto Rico has just voted to want to become a state, I would really encourage folks to read it and get, other people may be a lot more informed than I am, but I learned a lot. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a great one. 2020 has been pretty stressful. How do you unplug? What's a hobby, or how do you just, separate yourself from all the heaviness of the world?
One of my core strategies right now is boxing. I've been boxing for about a year. I started just before pandemic, and I love it. And it's really good for me because there are just a million things you can do wrong. I don't know if you've ever boxed, but like
I have not.
if they're shouting out the combination and you're trying to get it right, and there are a million different things you can do wrong, but if you're not 100% focused on what you're doing, you can't
Get
follow.
smacked in the
And you get
face.
yeah. So, I mean, I cannot think about anything but boxing, which there aren't very many things where that's true.
Sure.
I'm definitely a like thinking about something else kind of person, and boxing for me, in addition to, the
physical
the feeling,
exercise. Yeah.
which is awesome. I find it like a pretty like brain cleansing, spirit cleansing
Yeah, sure.
experience too.
It's like as soon as you take your mind off, you're gonna get smacked in the face by somebody. So you gotta
That's
focus.
not actually the issue because no one's hitting back at me.
Okay.
But I have such a strong pull to try and do things well
Sure.
that I'm so motivated to like try and get better, and I am getting better at it too, which is fun because I feel like there's so many things in my life where I'm just getting a little bit worse every year. And it's good to have something that's like a new hobby where it's like, oh, I'm getting better. I can feel it.
I was gonna say, are you a dabbler? Like, is that something that then in 2021 you'll pick up a new skill, or you think you'll keep going?
No, I'm a tennis player who doesn't play tennis anymore right now because I've had an issue with my hand, and so this is in some ways it's finding a different outlet
Replacement.
for me. So I really love it. So I hope I'll go back. I hope eventually I'll be a boxer and a tennis player because I hope I'll be able to get back to tennis. But I would be playing tennis if I could.
Got it. I mentioned this before the call, but we asked this question when we hire at Lemonly. What's your superpower? The one thing that you do and excel so greatly at?
I can tell you what I hope it is and what I try for it to be,
Sure.
which is actually the trying to get enough input and insight from other people to figure out what I should be doing better. So it's sort of that ability to self-improve.
Yeah.
Continuously, and so I really, I don't think I that's something that is definitely an acquired superpower. I don't think I had it before. I think working at McKinsey helped me because when I first worked at McKinsey and you'd get feedback on things you could do better, I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Like, in school you get like A, and
you're a high achiever. Yeah.
Well, I felt like, if you get critical feedback, it's an insult. And what I learned at McKinsey was like, oh my gosh, critical feedback makes you so much better. And now
so you crave that now, and you want
I crave it, want it sometimes. It's still hard. Like, it's not like I really want to know what everybody thinks all the time. But at least getting enough that I have an agenda for myself all the time of some of the things that I should be working on.
Yeah, that's a good lesson as a leader too. Yeah. We mentioned you have 2 children. What's any parenting advice you would give someone who's listening?
The best advice I think that I got in, I think my kids are turning out pretty well, but was the advice to praise effort rather than achievement. So
that's good.
That like, oh my gosh, you were working so hard on learning that piano song, or oh my gosh, you put so much work into that drawing. I love it, and not get into a sense of like you are a good artist or you are a good piano player, but sort of like the pleasure and the reward is in the effort
process, not the outcome. Yeah, I like that. And then lastly, you mentioned one person earlier, but who are you could know them or just people you're inspired by, but the mentors or leaders that have shaped you in your life?
I'm inspired by a lot of folks, and I did actually, in leading Itasca, have this amazing opportunity to work with a ton of leaders, a ton of CEOs, and get to see different things they were good at and see like, oh, I want to be like that, like them, or that like them. And there was one leader in particular where I could say, oh, there's enough ways that we're similar that I can see myself trying to be more like her. Like some people I could just take pieces, but I couldn't be the kind of leader that they are for a variety of reasons. Yeah. And that's a woman who then I've had the good fortune of getting to be friends with and work on other boards together. And she's now on the Bush board. Oh, cool. And it's one of the great good fortunes of my life, I think, to have had all the sort of direct relationships I've had with different kinds of leaders to learn from, but my relationship with her and being able to see her directly in action and analyze, she has been really, really lucky.
Does she know that?
And
Have
I
you told
think
her
it
this?
gets to that, when people talk about in leadership, you can't be what you can't see. The flip side of my experience is, the reason she was particularly important to me as a mentor is because of the ways that I could identify with her and her leadership style, and what
Yeah.
that means for people who are trying to carve their leadership path where they don't see people in leadership who they identify with for a variety of reasons, but maybe it's around culture, race, other parts of identity, other parts of experience, and feeling like that's a harder road as a leader to not be able to see someone in the same way. So I recognize that as something that was very lucky for me.
Yeah, and it seems really core to what, the fellowship that you guys are doing. If those leaders don't exist, they do exist, but let's lift them up so that other people realize they exist and they can see them.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this was such a fun conversation. Thank you for your time, Jen. It was great to get to know you better and hear about the great work you're doing. So, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Take
All right,
care.
you take care. Bye.
Bye.
All right, folks, that's the end of our conversation with Jennifer Ford Reedy, the president of the Bush Foundation. That was such a great conversation. She is so, so smart. That was episode 24 of the Leadmore podcast. Next week on episode 25, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm excited for. So we'll keep it a surprise for now, but we'll drop it probably on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. Usually we drop episodes on Thursday, but we'll give you the whole holiday weekend to catch up and listen to episode 25. All right, I'm John T. Meyer. You can find me online, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at John T. Meyer. Find all episodes at leadmorepodcast.com or wherever you subscribe to your podcast. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week. Take care.